One of the big features that they sell for ranked choice voting is that it guarantees the winner gets over 50%. But the reality is the person that wins the election really didn't have a majority. It's a faux majority. If you didn't pick a second and third place, then your ballot actually doesn't count in the final tally. It's not an intuitive thing. You can't just throw these ballots out there and expect people to figure out how they work. 75% of their total funding has come from out of state. Why are people from out of state so invested in changing the way we vote? There are a few very wealthy people who are political philanthropists, and they're trying to change how we run our election. They want to get rid of the party influence and replace it with what? That's the question. Their answer really is they're going to replace it with themselves. I'm a refugee from California. I left there, I call it the class of 2020. So
the COVID class?
You run into a lot of COVID class, right? You run into a lot of Californians in Idaho now.
Right.
And it's how long you've been here. So that's why I say I'm the class of 2020. So we left in 2020.
Okay.
Just after the election, presidential election then. So.
Did you come up here because you knew some family or friends, or was it that you had visited for work and you're like, that's where we're going to go? Or
So yeah, COVID expedited. We were probably not going to retire in California. So it expedited that with everything being closed down. Both my wife and I have family at the time, had family in Seattle.
Okay.
But didn't want to go from one blue state to another blue state. And Idaho was like the closest red state to family. And we'd been through here a couple years before on an RV trip and liked it. So yeah, we figured, let's do it. We sold the house and head out.
Nice, nice. And were you in the southern or northern part of the state, or where were you
Los
from?
Angeles, so southern part of the state.
The really, really fun part.
Yes, yes. I'd say Maxine Waters was my congressperson when I lived in California. Yeah.
So for background's sake, you came up here, I assume, for work. Do you do stuff with just technical things, or?
Yeah, my background's IT, software development, database. Before COVID, I would go out and visit with my clients. With COVID, that was all shut down. And in fact, I lost a couple of clients who went out of business because of COVID.
Really?
And then,
you would think in the IT world, that wouldn't be the problem. It'd be booming. Everyone's on Zoom, everyone's on.
Yeah, when your clients disappear, that makes it tough. But I was thinking I wasn't visiting my clients. I was doing remote sessions with them. I don't need to be in California where it's a lot more expensive. I was paying a mortgage, healthcare, everything was more expensive there. So I thought I could do this from really anywhere. That's what I did. Is there was nothing keeping me there with COVID and lockdown. So that allowed us to come to Idaho, and it's a lot less expensive.
Yes, yes. I've heard the stories of, oh yeah, a McDonald's worker getting paid 25 or something down there. And to me, it's what?
Yeah.
Growing up here whole life. So it sounds like your background, your work didn't have you in politics directly.
No.
But you were politically active down in California to a degree.
I was not. I followed politics, but I was never active.
Okay.
And that's one of the pledges I made to myself, is that was my home. And leaving my home, it's like, I don't regret it. I'm not going back because California is lost, but it was a tough thing to do. And I decided if I do move, I want to get involved with politics now so that we don't have happen in California, or have it happen here what happened in California. So I decided it wasn't going to be a spectator anymore. I wanted to get involved.
It's a good thing. And I've heard a lot of people that have come from California with just that. I saw what it did, and now I want to be involved to prevent it.
Yeah.
Which you've probably seen it. When you go to a lot of political events in Idaho, it's crazy how much of the room is made up of ex-Californians.
Yep.
I am the minority oftentimes. And so when I'm sitting with people, lovingly going to say this, other fellow Idahoans that are like, oh, these Californians, they're Californiating Idaho. I'm like, no, it's you. You're not actually involved. It's, okay, say, name X bill you really like, Mr. Idaho. And they're like, I like, I don't know, maybe the heartbeat bill, right, for abortion or something, or maybe it's something about firearm protection. Most of that got really supported from people that were out of state.
Yeah.
They were really involved in pushing for it. So
I like to say the cream of the crop left and came here. But I know that's not always the case. But what I was going to say is, it's interesting when you talk to people who used to live behind the Iron Curtain, they are the tripwires for communism, right? Because they saw it, they lived under it. And they're seeing things that we didn't experience. Like the Cubans coming out of Cuba, they're very aware and alert.
We want illegal immigrants, but we don't want Cubans. Sorry.
Right. So they see these policies starting to happen here that they saw there, and they're the first ones to usually to speak up and say, hey, realize what's going on. So I hope
Right.
Californians are bringing that. A lot of them are bringing
Right.
that. Seeing, like, I grew up there. I saw it. We were a conservative state, big defense industry.
I mean,
Reagan, we had several conservative or Republican governors. I don't know how conservative they were, but they were at least Republican, but no more. It's a one-party state right now.
Right. Especially, we'll get into that later, but with some of the ranked choice voting implemented in different parts of it. You came, you said you're going to be involved, you got involved. What has that all looked like? Did that happen at the Central Committee meeting? How did that process start?
Interesting. I first went to a county Central Committee meeting, and
Okay.
I was pretty green about how the Republican Party was structured. I didn't know what a precinct committeeman was, for
Right.
instance, right? But I went to a couple of the meetings just saying, how do I get involved? I called and left messages. I wanted to volunteer, and I never got a response back.
Right.
And I got the sense that at that time, they wanted you to just donate and go away. They really didn't want the help.
Right.
Is the impression I got. So I was frustrated. So I was just wandering around. If the GOP doesn't have any place for me to volunteer, I need to find something to
Right.
do. What was happening at the time, a lot of people, how I got into this started after 2020. And a lot of people had the same story, right? They were watching the election returns on November 3rd, was it?
Something like that. I remember that now. I was with a couple friends on a Discord call,
Yeah.
and they started rolling in. You're like, wait a second, what's that spike there?
Right. Yeah. Or, it looked like I was listening to pollsters going through the precinct level returns and stuff saying Trump had substantial margins of winning in several of the key states.
Right.
And then they said, we're going to stop counting.
Like,
and to this date, I don't know who made that, but it was several media outlets said they're going to stop counting. So they sent everybody home. And then we wake up the next morning and flip Wisconsin, flip Pennsylvania, flip Georgia,
right.
flip Michigan. And everybody's, what happened? We were all just astounded, right? And so we waited for state legislators to look into it, do something. We waited for the courts. We waited for the Congress to do something. Nothing happened. And about the summer of the next year, there was a citizen group formed, a grassroots level in every state that was going to audit the elections in every state. That was their goal. So the Idaho group formed last July, or July 2021, and that's where I got started. So I was following that, and I got involved with elections through that. And my background's IT and software. The first thing, my experience is I need to learn how the system works.
Right.
Right, how it's supposed to work.
If you know what it is, then you can start diagnosing, okay, is it this part? You can start problem solving.
Because, and I'm finding that most people in the country had no idea how our elections were actually running.
Right.
Right, which is not a good thing.
No.
So I think that's one benefit that's come from the past 3 years or 4 years, is that a lot of people have gotten into studying our elections, how they work, how they're supposed to work,
right,
how they might not work. So that's again my background. That's what I do for a living. So now it was just turning it towards the election process and learning that. So I've just spent the last 3 years getting to meet our clerks, done several tours at the election facility. I've gotten involved every way I can with the election process. I've been a poll watcher. I've overseen poll watchers. I've gone down to the election facility after hours on election day, just hung out and see how things go. And again, it's just learning how the system works and figuring out, okay, where are the vulnerabilities.
With that, then you got into it. And then we have now with this election on the 5th, Prop 1 that's showing up, which has a couple components that it's doing to Idaho's elections. I know you've gotten involved with Secure Iowa elections, if I have that, in a couple other groups. What, I guess, got you into that? What got you then involved with Secure Iowa elections and then learning about Prop 1?
So it's just, I guess I developed somewhat of a reputation in the election integrity world and here in Idaho, so that I was asked, hey, they're going to form a group, formal C4. Everything I'd done was grassroots. It was all volunteer.
Right.
So they're going to form this group, and there's a couple people getting together. So they asked me if I wanted to be involved with that. And I said, it's a natural extension for me. So I said, yeah, sure. That sounds great. And that was Secure Idaho Elections. It's a C4. Right. But we started the process, and it's an educational group. So when I say I'm against ranked choice voting, that's cool. When I say I'm vote no on Prop 1, that's me talking as an individual, not as a Secure Idaho Elections, right? So we do have that. We're not supposed to advocate, but no, the ranked choice voting, we got involved with that, and obviously that's a key factor of Prop 1.
What all does Secure Idaho Elections do, and then when was it formed?
Yeah, we just formed over the summer this year.
Summer of last year?
This year.
This year,
right.
Okay.
Because we saw Prop 1 was going to be on the ballot, most likely.
Getting the
wasn't
signatures.
Formalized at that time, but we saw it was most likely going to be on the ballot. It was like, okay, what groups are going to pop up and fight against this? Because we know the people that are for it, they're well funded, they know what they're doing. And if we just go as newbies without any organization to try and stop this,
Right.
that's not going to be less chance of being successful.
Right.
So Secure Idaho Elections got the ball rolling, and then there's a couple PACs that have pretty much taken up from there. What we started, they continue to roll with, and we
Right.
had to step back as a group. But we still about education and just informing people.
And leading up here, because this will come out on Sunday, so about a week or so till the election, I think, if I'm remembering my time flies. How's that info process going? And do you think you guys are doing well or badly educating people?
We did a poll.
Okay.
So that was something I think was in our bounds. And we just asked people. We wanted to we just told them about the two parts of it, right? The top four primary part and then the ranked choice voting part. And then just asked them how they're going to plan on voting before. And then we started asking them about the concerns. And I'll say the poll part just on Prop 1, it's pretty close. There's a lot of support for
Right.
it. And there's a lot of support against it.
Is that the same one with Idaho Dispatch?
That was
or
a
did you guys
different
do
one.
a separate one?
They did theirs
Okay.
about a week later than we did ours.
Okay.
Right. And some differences, but I think the needle's been moving, just monitoring social media and stuff. I think people are getting more aware of what it is and what the pitfall. Because if you just listen to the other side, it sounds great. It's going to solve all our
KTVB
problems, make
7,
our
Eastern
elections
Idaho.
give us more choices, and let veterans vote because they're
Right.
apparently blocked from voting right now. So anyways, so the polling shows that it's pretty close, and it's still the undecided that's
Independence.
going to swing the difference. It's still a matter of getting out there and having the conversations and talking to people and informing them. And,
Right.
Hopefully they're not just persuaded by the big money
Right.
that's on the other side that's just going to hammer their message. They need to know what are the other things that are, wait a minute, that sounds good, but wait a minute, what's it going to cost? What's it going to do to our elections?
Right.
And those are the things people have to know about.
I mean, speaking about that and getting into it a little bit, you mentioned it's got two parts. There's the top four primary,
Right.
and then ranked choice voting. Starting with the top four primary, one, what is a primary for someone who's, all I know is you got the presidential election, I vote for the president, I vote for my congressman. What's a primary? What is that? And then what exactly is Prop 1 doing with the primary?
So I think it's a great question because I think there's a lot of ignorance, quite frankly, about what a primary is. A primary, if you look at the Secretary of State website in Idaho, the purpose of a primary is for a political party to nominate its candidate for the general election.
Which are private organizations.
Private organizations, right? And the question is, okay, so they're saying once the GOP closed the primary, it blocked people from voting. If they're not Republican, why should they vote on the Republican candidate?
Why should they vote for a private group like a gun club? Why should they decide who's going to be the leader of the gun club when they don't even go to the club?
Exactly, right? But here's the other thing too, people aren't blocked from voting. As an independent voter, you brought I just got this in the mail. I don't know if it's helpful, but this is what's going in the mail. And it says it's going to restore open primaries, allows all Idahoans, including 275,000 independents, to vote in taxpayer-funded elections. Now, if I read that without knowing the background, that's wrong.
There's people being
shouldn't
disenfranchised.
They should be allowed to vote.
Right.
They are allowed to vote, but they got to affiliate with a party if they want to vote in that party's election. And even with the independents they talk about, they have a special exemption in our statute right now. They can show up on the day of an election and request any party ballot they want and vote that ballot. Now, it does affiliate them with that party, but it doesn't cost them anything. They can change it right back if they, for some reason, are just offended by being associated with the Republican Party.
Right.
But that's what's the deal. Key thing, though, too, is, and it's, they really hit this. I was at a debate last week where one of the leading figures in the pro-Prop 1 side, he led off the debate saying that we used to have open primaries in Idaho, which is true. And in 2011, the GOP closed their primary, right? And that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And he said when they did that, it blocked 270,000 people from voting. If that was true, and so his concern is that, okay, by their narrative, what do you think happened? It sounds like all these people were showing up to vote in the primary and everything was hunky-dory. Then the GOP closed the primary and all of a sudden they didn't vote anymore. They didn't show up in the primary. The problem is the data shows otherwise. The turnout before the GOP closed the primary and after they closed the primary was about 30%. It was that before and it was that afterwards.
Nothing changed.
So, right, closing the primary really had no effect. All it did is the people that were crossover voting as independents before, They just changed their party to Republican and they voted. The bulk of these independents that everybody's concerned about, they just aren't showing up to vote.
Right.
That's a problem. I agree that's a problem, but this is not the solution. This proposition is not going to solve that problem.
Or let alone people who, if you're out voting, you may not think to register beforehand or whatever else. Having that's, oh, I always vote Republican. The system's going to automatically identify you as Republican and put you with that affiliation, even if you don't manually do it. And also, a lot of times with the primary elections, I went and vote. The lines were far shorter than they're going to be
Yeah.
coming up here. But there's other stuff on the primaries. There's oftentimes levies and things that are not partisan that you can vote on, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, and some of those, they've consolidated some of the elections, but some of those levy elections weren't even on the primary election. They were even less well attended than,
Okay.
than the primary, which, again, you think there's probably design to that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
With a primary, it's basically a secondary election in the cycle or whatever else that then allows parties to decide, okay, this is going to be our Republican candidate. This is going to be our Democrat candidate. This is going to be our, I think there's constitutional party here in Idaho.
Yep.
And then I don't think you need does the independent group have one?
No, as long as they qualify as an independent candidate, they go straight to the general. So they don't have to compete.
They get a free ticket.
Primary. They get a free ticket, exactly. And that's going to change. And
right.
That's one of the things that independent voters or independent candidates, this is not good for them. This is not going to encourage third parties and stuff because now they have to compete in the primary and be one of the top 4 vote getters in order to make it to the general.
Which, talking on that, we've talked about how the primaries work currently. What would Prop 1 do to the primary? How would it change it?
As of now, when you go up into the primary, you show up and you select your ballot, whether it's Republican or unaffiliated or whatever, and you vote your one candidate and you turn it in and you're good. The change is now that there are no party ballots. It gets rid of partisan ballots. So everybody, all the candidates are going to be on one ballot. And then you still pick your top person. And then the top 4 vote getters on that list all advance to the general. So what can happen instead of in a true open primary, which is what they say they're trying to restore, that's not true. This is a top 4. It's a jungle primary, which means there's no parties.
It's all mixed together like a jungle.
It's all mixed together, exactly. So you could have 4 Republicans go to the general. You could have any combination. It could be 3 Democrats and Republican, 3 Democrats, constitute whatever. It's going to be whatever party they are. And that has ramifications, which we want to transition into the second part, the ranked choice voting side. Unfortunately, a lot of people right now, when they go and show up in the general election, and about twice as many people vote in the general as vote in the primary.
Yep.
So when they show up in the general, they get, if they're Republican, they get 1 R on the ballot on all these races. And a lot of people, they just pull the R lever.
Especially here in Idaho.
The brand is very important.
And it's not a bad thing per se. Some people want to whine and cry, but usually those are losers. But it's not a bad thing.
Right.
If you go to Costco and you like Kirkland, you're going to be like, well, I'm going to try to find all the Kirkland stuff.
The reality is a lot of people don't do the research that we hope people would, but they don't. But if you think about it, when they go in the general and they vote, if they're Republican, they're going to pull the Republican switch. If they're Democrat, they're going to pull the Democrat because they've let the party do the vetting for them. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
But it's kind of the reality.
Pluses and minuses.
Right. Now you're going to have multiple R's or multiple D's in your general election. And so now they're not going to know what to do. These people that just pull the R lever, because there's multiple R's now in the race. So which one do I vote for? If you think you're going to get them to actually do research now, I don't think you're going to be able to change voter behavior.
It's not 1776.
So, and this is the ingenious part of this plan, this 1-2 punch, right? The jungle primary with the ranked choice voting. First, you get these low info voters, let's call them what they are.
Right.
They don't know the candidates, but now you're forcing them to know the candidates and rank them in order of preference.
And is the ranked choice voting being used in the primary and the general, or just in the general after the primary?
Just in the general.
So just in the general. So the primary would still be on the standard
Yes, everybody's familiar with, right?
Right.
Other than everybody's going to be on one giant ballot.
Okay.
Which we can talk about from an administration standpoint, there's some real challenges that these people haven't thought through.
So then coming back to ranked choice voting and looking at that, how does that exactly work? Fleshing out ranked choice voting and what it's doing. Why is it different than what we have right now?
So right now, you go in on your general election and you vote for one candidate in each race. You just pick one and that's it.
Right.
With ranked choice voting, you're now going to rank the 4 people that made it through from the top 4 primary. You're now going to rank them in order, in order of your preference. So you're going to pick 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have to do that, but
that can cause some haywires.
Right.
You don't.
They gets into a thing called exhausted ballots, right? Which is if you only said, I only going to pick this person, the other three I don't care for, I'm not going to vote for them. If your person that you picked didn't make it in the final two,
Right. Maybe this is my person, but he ended up in third or fourth or something.
if you didn't pick a second and third place, then your ballot actually doesn't count in the final tally. If you only pick one
Right.
and they don't make it in the final two, then your ballot's exhausted. So it doesn't count in the final tally. And one of the big features that they sell for ranked choice voting is that it guarantees the winner gets over 50%.
So it's more equitable. You're not having just this party elite blob or whatever. You're actually trying to get the will of the people.
Right. And you're not getting people that win with 32% of the vote. So that's a big no because they don't represent the majority of the voters, right? They're not accountable because they're no longer representing over half the voters.
Right.
But the reality is, and they've done a study in Maine, Maine's been doing ranked choice voting elections for quite a while. And over 60% of the time, the person that wins the election really didn't have a majority.
Really?
It's a faux majority. And
It's a calculated majority.
Yeah, exactly. Because the exhausted ballots, they've changed the denominator. So even though it says they got over 50%, it's only 50% of the ballots that were left after they've exhausted the ones that they didn't vote right.
How long has Maine been doing ranked choice voting? Do you know roughly?
They adopted in 2018.
Okay.
And then I think their first election was 2020 with it. But they've been doing it at the municipal level for a few years prior to that. And then Alaska started they voted on it in 2020, and then their first election was 2022.
Which I know right now they're trying to remove it.
Yes.
For this election as well.
Yeah, so the proponents spent $7 million in Alaska to get it passed, and it passed with 50.55% of the vote. So it's a very slim margin, even though they spent a ton of money. So now the repeal effort was grassroots. I think they had 50 grand that they raised or something like that to get it on the ballot. And so they think what's popular in Alaska, we'll see in November if they repeal it. But you look at, and it's the same thing happening here in Idaho. The money that's behind the pro to get this ranked choice voting installed is it's 10 to 20 to 1 versus the people that are trying to stop it.
And coming back real briefly to the ranked choice. So you've got the ranking, you put the rank in, and it's looking for, okay, we're going to shuffle these. What's that shuffling? What's that deciding process on the ranking to determine the winner?
The algorithm?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The way it works is that the person that gets the least amount of votes, they get removed.
Out of the first ranking.
Out of the first. So first of all, the ranked choice voting algorithm doesn't trigger unless somebody doesn't get over 50%.
Right? Okay, so if you had just two candidates and then there's someone that gets 50, then ranked choice voting doesn't.
Exactly. Okay. Right. But it's only when nobody gets over 50%, then that triggers the algorithm. And then the candidate with the least votes, they get eliminated. Their second place votes, the people that voted for them voted for them first, now they get redistributed according to who they voted for.
And they get eliminated based on being ranked at a lower category than other people?
Well, whoever gets the least amount of votes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right? Yeah. And then they do that until there's two candidates left. Okay. And whoever is over 50%.
And so they take then the votes, if I remember correctly they take the votes from some of those lower candidates and they redistribute those
correct
top two vote getters once they eliminate it down?
Yeah, so you rank your preferences, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So if your first preference gets eliminated, then your vote goes to whoever you voted for second.
Okay.
Okay. And then if that second person gets eliminated, it goes to your third vote.
Okay.
And by then you're done.
You have the ranking and you're trying to get it down to two candidates so you can get a majority. And then based on that ranking, if your first place candidate gets eliminated or whatever, it switches to your second.
Right.
What if your first place vote getter never gets eliminated and ends up being one of the number two? Right, when it gets
then you're fine. It stays with your first place. Yeah.
Okay. And what then, for someone, they might think, that doesn't sound too horrible, too bad. You're just dropping down the ranking of my preference, and that's fine. What's the danger or risk with that, and where have we seen that play out?
Yeah, some of the concerns is that the confusion of the voter. It's not an intuitive thing, so you have to be shown how it works. You're not just going to give somebody a ballot and say, just vote for the person you want. That's pretty simple. This ranking now is something people haven't done. Right. So they have to be educated on that. And if they're not educated, again, it's not intuitive, so they're going to make mistakes.
Right.
People make mistakes now. They do overvotes, which means they fill in both bubbles instead of just one.
Because they think it's some separate thing.
Now you've got more bubbles to fill in, so there's more opportunity for people to mess it up. It's just human nature that's going to happen.
Right.
And we've seen studies that 10 times as many voter errors in ranked choice voting elections than in non.
Really?
Yeah, and the other thing that's not really talked about, the guy that actually is leading the repeal effort in Alaska, he got into this because his grandfather said, I'm not going to vote. It's too confusing. It so upset him. Well, we got to stop this. His grandfather is not going to vote because of this. So one thing, the people that show up and make mistakes voting, but the people that don't want to show up at all because they might feel stupid or foolish or they're not sure what they're doing. So they just say, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And we don't know how many of those there are, but they are out there.
Okay. That's interesting. I hadn't heard about that part up in Alaska there. So you have that risk. Is there a certain risk with the algorithm, and how does that play into also auditing election? If someone says,
Sure.
I disagree or whatever else, how does that work with an automated system?
Yeah, the algorithms is pretty simple. It's not rocket science, but we saw in Oakland that there was a case where they didn't configure the machines properly, so it made a mistake in the algorithm. That stuff would probably get worked out, but the transparency is a big deal because right now in Idaho, we do a hand counting of if a race is close enough, it triggers a recount, right?
Right.
And a candidate can actually ask a recount even if it's not. And part of that recount does hand recounting. It's almost impossible to do a hand count of a ranked choice voting election, especially if you're talking like a statewide race where the ballots are strewn about 44 counties.
Right, because every county has, in Idaho, you have the different election offices, and each county does it a little differently. Like, for those of us over in Canyon County, I'm so used to the fact of, okay, I go into the machine and I input all my votes, and then it like punches a card out on a paper one, and then I go do that or whatever else.
Right.
Rather than Ada County, if I remember correctly, has like bubbles, and you fill all those out, and then a machine scans that,
Right.
and is able to see where the bubbles are.
Yeah, and so if you try to hand count that, you've got ballots like District 23. It crosses 3 counties. So you've got ballots in Canyon County, you got ballots in Owyhee County, you got ballots in Ada County. And now I want to do a hand count of that election. How do I do? I've got to get all those ballots together in one place.
Right.
So now do it on a statewide race. It's 44 counties.
Right.
That's why it makes it impossible. The other thing on that is the Secretary of State, they passed this a couple of years ago. They do a random hand count audit of our elections.
Which has actually been super cool to see that
Yeah,
the new attorney's done.
Yeah, it's a great thing because prior to then, we had no idea if the machines were
doing their job.
Yeah. So and this is something that should be done anyways, because even if there's no nefarious agenda or people programming the machines, they can make mistakes. And we've seen that happen. There was a story in Georgia of a lady that she was running, and she was running a race, and in her own precinct, she got 0 votes. So apparently she didn't even vote for herself. And so everybody's, okay, something's not right here. So they found out they misconfigured the machines.
Really?
And again, nobody was trying to do it. Nobody
no malicious intent.
Exactly. But they just made a mistake. So it's a very good idea to make sure that our machines are checked.
Right.
And so this random hand count that gets done is a very important process. Make sure that the machines counted accurately. Because if they're misconfigured, that stands out like a sore thumb usually.
Right.
But what's going to happen with all that? We don't know. If we can't viably hand count election, does it all go away?
Right.
That's an open question.
Also on that you mentioned it brought it to my brain, and also with your background of being involved in elections and stuff like that, I think a lot of people outside of politics think, okay, there's the poll people, and they're like professionals. They're professional people that do all the voting and everything, and the state's paying them. Not really. A lot of it is volunteers. You may have the county clerk or whoever else that may actually be a paid position, but the vast majority of people that are working at the polls are just like you and me.
Or they're short term, they're like temporary.
Right.
So like the poll workers, they get paid, but they're there for a day, and God bless them for what they do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So with that, to then put it in perspective for yourself, to be like, okay, we have this new system, ranked choice voting, or Prop 1, the more general bit. Looked at the different components. First one, open primaries, or jungle primaries, and then ranked choice voting and how all that works. The big thing for a lot of conservatives, because Idaho's a conservative state, what's the cost?
Right.
What is the cost of changing? Is it no cost at all? Is it just training people, so it's just hours that we need to dedicate? Is that new machines? What all is that? What is the cost?
Sure. So our Secretary of State, Phil McGrain, he wrote a letter to the Legislative Council back in July. And in that, he said, look, from an election administration standpoint, Forget the politics of whether this is a good idea or a bad idea
Just on that
philosophically.
brass tacks.
Yeah, just, hey, this is what's going to affect us as we administer elections, right? There's some things that the legislature should know and the public should know. And one of those was that right now, all the machines that are in place in Idaho cannot tabulate a ranked choice voting ballot.
Because didn't we pass legislation, it was either this session or session before last, that prevents our voting machines from connecting up to the internet, right?
That's
so they
part
can't
of it
communicate.
too. Yes, yeah, because that has a different complication, which
Right.
is, again, how do we tabulate
All
a
that
ranked
data.
choice voting election statewide? How do we get that data without going on the internet? So he outlined that in the letter too. But this with the voting machines, because they don't tabulate a ranked choice voting ballot, they either have to be upgraded or they have to be replaced. And there's a certification issue. You can't just upgrade them, because right now the statute says they have to be certified. They have to be certified by the federal government through the EAC, separate story. But anyways, he said if we have to replace the machines, it's going to cost $25 to $40 million across the state to do that. There's another cost issue though, that $40 million number gets thrown out there a lot. There's some caveats to it.
It can overshadow.
Yeah, but there's another number, which is the voter education, which we talked about earlier. You can't just throw these ballots out there and expect people to figure out how they work. You have to educate
sending out videos, pamphlets.
Exactly.
It doesn't even have to be a person sitting.
Exactly. McGrain went and talked to the people in Alaska. Hey, they've gone through this. Let's learn from what they learned.
And they're a super rural state, similar to us.
Yes, much bigger geographically, but smaller population-wise. But they told him they spent $3.5 million on voter education, and they said they wish they had more money to do it because it wasn't enough. So now they're a smaller state population-wise. They spent $3.5 million on voter education. We're going to easily spend $5-6 million to match that just from a population standpoint. And is that going to be enough? That's a little, the $40 million gets a lot of the headlights, but that's a very real cost that we're going to have to bear. And that's $7 million, regardless of whether the machines get certified or the upgraded software is available.
Right.
So there's some hard costs there that are very important to know. And I will say this, the backers that got this on the ballot, they got Medicaid on the ballot through initiative process back in 2018, which was popular at the time, but we're seeing that the projected numbers of what it was going to cost, nowhere close to what they really are.
Right.
So now, if they're that good with numbers on the Medicaid
if we're looking at our track record here.
Exactly. So they're not going to oversell you on how much it's going to cost. They're going to try and make that look as little as possible in their literature and everything else.
Even if you come in halfway, so you take, what are they saying they're estimating the cost will be?
1.6 million, I think, was the worst case scenario that I recall reading.
So you take theirs and then you just go down the middle.
One-time fee.
Just one time.
Yeah.
So we go down just right down the middle between Phil McGrain's and theirs. Even then, what's that, like 20 million or something?
You're in that range, yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
So even if they're halfway right, McGrain's off by 20 million. I can't believe we're joking about 20 million, but welcome government. That's still a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. McGrain, when he came into office, he went to the legislature, asked for $10 million to upgrade the software and the systems that are used.
Right.
And we can debate whether that was a good thing or bad, but that was $10 million, and that was a push to get that approved. Now we're talking $40 million for election equipment. We already have election equipment that works.
We're literally going to take good equipment and be like,
scrap it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and replace it.
And in his report, did he outline maybe what we could get back for it at all?
The equipment that we have?
Yeah.
You might be able to third market that. There's not a big market for...
Unless an entire state's changing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's the financial part of it. And we've talked about how technically Prop 1 works, the inner workings of it. What is the result of that? Where we've seen something similar to it, or ranked choice voting, or jungle primary has been implemented. What usually happens, because, the people don't instantly change and their voting habits don't instantly change. Over one election to the other, it's going to be roughly similar. You're just going to have different candidates maybe. What has been the result of that? How does it change things?
I think...
Or the effect?
Yeah, and I think if you just look at ranked choice voting elections and with the top four, I think the people behind it, they talk about they don't want extreme candidates. Right, so they don't define what extreme is, but it's anybody who doesn't agree with you politically is extreme, right?
Right.
But I think there is, if you look at just a theoretical situation where you have a candidate on the left, a candidate on the right, and a candidate in the middle, and they're all about equal, this is going to favor the centrist candidate.
Right.
Because if either the left or the right gets eliminated, most likely their second place votes are going to go to the center. They say there's a benefit. There's going to be a moderating process and getting candidates that are more moderate.
At least they're honest about that part.
And it sounds like a pretty good argument actually, but are these moderate people that don't take stands? I've heard another term called lukewarm, right?
Milk toast.
Milk toast. Is that really what we want in our candidates? There's a great diatribe. I looked at the Lincoln election.
Right.
It was like a four-way. Lincoln did not get over 50%. And if they had ranked choice voting, we probably would not have had Abraham Lincoln. He was seen as an extreme person at that time, but
Right.
you know,
it was the first national election I think a Republican candidate won. Was Lincoln's, if I remember.
Well, that was the new Republican Party. Right?
Yeah.
That's why it formed, because of the slavery issue.
It would be like a libertarian winning the presidential race.
Right.
Today. It'd be like, what happened?
Yeah. That had to be a big issue.
Okay, so it tends to favor more of a moderate, or say we'll go to both extremes for the sake of someone different sides. For the Democrat side, if you have really extreme Democrat politicians, right, it's going to favor pulling it more towards the center, more moderate Democrats or more moderate Republicans or whatever. Vice versa, in a really heavy Republican area, it's going to pull it more to the center. You're going to get more moderate Republicans or Democrats in that case. And then the question obviously becomes, what exactly do we want moderate, and what is that? Does that mean moderate as someone that's not as feisty and all this and rhetoric, or does that mean a person that never wants to give a position at all?
Yeah, I think it's a good debate to figure out, but this idea that moderate is just immediately better, I think they're making a conclusion there that I don't think that the data will bear that out.
Looking at the effects, we've looked at what the cost would be, how it would change, how Idaho's elections. Who are the main people backing it and funding it and pushing it? Is it something that's really grassroots here in Idaho? Or is it something outside of Idaho? Where exactly is the funding or pushing or desire for? Why is this even a thing?
Let's dispel the notion that it's a grassroots Idaho issue, right? Because this is the Alaska model. What Alaska did is what we're doing, right? And what we're doing, or what they're trying to do here, they're doing in Colorado, they're doing in Nevada, they're doing in Arizona, they're doing in Oregon, they're doing in Montana. This is not a grassroots state level issue. There are a few very wealthy people who are political philanthropists, and that's what they're trying to do is basically change how we run our election. If you look at the money, this is actually, in the last 2 weeks, there's been $2.7 million put into this state for the pro Prop 1 side.
From outside
the state, right? So Idahoans for Open Primaries, they're like the lead dog pushing this, right? And most of that money's gone to them.
Okay.
Now, 75% of their total funding, all the money that they've collected, has come from out of state. I know people that even they think they're for, that gives them pause, because why are people from out of state so invested in changing the way we vote? And again, not just here in Idaho, but in other states. They're pushing this same idea. If you look into them, one of them is a group called Unite America. They're out of Colorado, and they've done like 2 million of that 2.7 themselves. If you really dig into them, they are progressive. They overwhelmingly, it's a small group of people with a lot of money. And I've done a little analysis of these people. Their funding is mostly to the left. They're Democrat causes, and that's fine. They're free to do that.
Free country.
But their stated objective is, some of the diagnoses I think they have right. Again, the low voter turnout's a problem. I don't like that. We're not a representative
we can all agree on that.
without, and they're right. Again, this is not the solution that's going to change that. They're concerned about the divisiveness in politics. They're concerned that popular things like our debt, our federal debt, and then even our state level financing, that nothing's getting done. So I think they have some very valid points.
Right.
But what they're trying to do, they see the party system is broken, and they want to get rid of the party influence and replace it with what? That's the question. And
it's one thing to say if a thing's broken, but then what's your answer? What's your solution after that?
So their answer really is they're going to replace it with themselves, because now they're basically bringing all this money and influencing these elections. You think they're going to stop when it comes down to candidates? So let's say the party influence is completely removed. We haven't talked about the money in politics, the influence of money in politics, and especially when they've got money, they can spend $3 million on a proposition. That overshadows a lot of the money that goes into our legislative races and everything
Local
else.
races,
Right? there's more money going into this than anything, all the other races combined, right?
Right.
So if they can do that for this, what are they going to do when it's our candidates on the line, right?
Right.
That's a big concern. Again, if you look into who these people are and why they're doing it, they are progressive. That's what they're trying to replace political influence with their own.
Right. Right.
That's my read.
And from what you're saying, that seems very accurate, and I would agree. I think another part of it for any of us who have had a decent amount of time on this earth know that we as human beings, we like to coalesce around things like I have my church, or if you're not a religious person, to have X group or Y group, or we all follow or watch this thing. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually, I think, a wonderful and good thing to have leaders and people we listen to and stuff. But an idea or notion that you're going to get rid of some, say, okay, yeah, we get rid of the party structure. We get rid of the right and the left or something. Humans are inevitably going to fill that with something else. And if you can't give an alternative that's better to, that's where it gets concerning. It's naive to think there won't be something.
Right. And there's a really interesting development in this whole process. So if you watch Alaska and what's happening there, their most recent primary, so they had 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat advance to, this is a congressional race, advance to the final, the general. 2 of the Republicans have dropped out. Maybe a little strong arm in some, but it is basically, hey, they don't agree with ranked choice voting. This is changing how the influence of the party. So if the party, are they going to sit there and take that? No, this is a way that they can say, okay, you're going to force us to run 3 candidates in the general. No, we're just going to leave the person with the top votes. We're going to send them like was done before.
Right.
So interesting what happened is the 5th and 6th place now are in the general election. So you got an independent and another Democrat, and the Democrats are suing. The Democrat Party is suing to get the other Democrat off the ballot because it's going to split the vote. But that's going to be this back and forth of one-upping each other. As you talked about the group association, you have a right to associate into groups.
Right.
And people associate, and this has gone back to our founding, people formed into political groups, and there's one side and the other side. And they're aligned in most things. There's a little bit of crossover on some issues, but for the most part, you're Democrat or you're Whig, right?
Right.
Now it's Republican. Then people have a right to do that. They have a right to associate. And that's one of the other issues with this proposition. Even if it passes, there are legal issues that have already been settled that this crosses. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Because one of the legal concerns, the biggest one I've heard about it, is that Idaho says with a proposition, because we can, as constituents, get something on the ballot like Proposition 1, it doesn't have to go through the legislature. There's a process for that. That's what they've used.
Yep.
That you can only have one thing you're doing. You're only changing one thing.
Right.
You can't do multiple things to change.
Single subject.
As we've talked about here, we have open primary and ranked choice voting. The court currently, as I remember, I think it's the Idaho Supreme Court, declined to look at it, saying basically to the effect, we're not going to look at it until after the election. Nothing has happened yet.
Right.
So there's no reason to rule. But it seems likely that there may also be that legal challenge coming if it does even pass.
That's still on the books, yeah. Yeah. We have, getting the weeds a little bit, Article 4, Section 2 talks about the statewide offices, the 7 statewide offices, governor, lieutenant governor, AG. It's pretty clear in our state constitution that the one who gets the most votes, the plurality voting, is the one who gets the most votes.
It might even come down to something constitutional.
Yeah, or at least those 7 offices. Ranked choice voting is it's against our Constitution. So this is a statute doesn't overrule the Constitution. So how's that going to play out?
Touching real briefly on that grassroots part you were talking about, you may know this, you might not, but if we see a lot of different states that are having ranked choice voting being pushed on or coming around, one could conclude that isn't as much of a grassroots if it's something that you're seeing a group pushing nationally, rather than if you're seeing states signing on, yeah, we want to join this, we want to do whatever else.
Right.
Is that something we are seeing nationally?
It's not a grassroots effort, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're seeing groups pushing it in other states to try to make it a thing. It's not, oh, this local person started it or whatever else.
No, the real money's coming from these out-of-state PACs. So United America PAC, Article 4 out of Virginia, Wayback PAC out of Wyoming. Those are big here. There's also Action Now, which is the former Enron guy. He got out before the Enron collapse with $1 billion. Yeah. So he's big on this, and he funded a lot of Alaska. But yeah, and Soros is behind some of this. Article 4.
Right.
If you
he crops up regularly.
Yeah, if you go back and look, there's a couple levels of PACs that they funnel money through one and another. But somebody's done some research, some great research on that,
right?
And showing that Open Society Foundation's behind some of that funding. Yeah, and There's a big question right now about should that be allowed or not. But I think if people just are informed who's pushing this and why, I think they'll make the right decision.
Right.
Right decision.
Thank you for coming and speaking with me and talking about it and explaining it, and hopefully the viewer finds some value in it. And thank you for listening, and thank you for
Yeah.
coming, sir.